In a world riddled with crime and chaos, certain mob hits in the United States stand out as the most notorious. Let's dive into today's 5 most ruthless mafia murders, beginning with Paul Castellano. Born Constantino Paul Castellano, this future crime family boss entered the world on June 26, 1915. Raised in the rough streets of Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, New York, by his parents Giuseppe and Concetta, he learned young the intricacies of the underworld. His father, a butcher by day, became an early member of the Mangano crime family, which later emerged as the Gambino crime family. Following in his father's footsteps, Paul abandoned academics before high school to cut meats and run numbers, both unique skills taught by Giuseppe. At just 19, Paul caught his first charge for robbing a small store in Hartford, Connecticut. It was the unwavering loyalty that he understood at an early age that catapulted his criminal career at this junction. Castellano had 2 accomplices in the burglary, but obeying the oath of omerta, he refused to reveal his companions in the crime and served his full 3-month prison sentence. This small act and sacrifice earned him a great deal of respect in the mob community. He continued to work as a butcher after his release, but maintained his connections to the Mafia and undertook tasks on the side from time to time. It wasn't until the 1940s that Castellano would officially join the Mangano family and become a caporegime, or capo, under then-boss Albert Anastasia. When Anastasia was clipped at his regular barbershop, Gambino rose to power and brought Paul along with him. In 1957, they attended the infamous Appalachian meeting in Appalachian, New York, where over 50 high-ranking family members gathered to discuss the future endeavors of the syndicate. However, the New York State Police raided the meeting, arresting Castellano once more. Stalwart and loyal, he refused again to testify to a grand jury about the meeting and served another 7 months in prison. Not wanting to appear as just a gangster, Paul, now known to most as Castellano, he ventured into the entrepreneurial realm, leveraging his background as a butcher to start Dial Poultry, a meat distribution company servicing the city. Yet his underworld ruthlessness seeped through as he used intimidation tactics, employing his goons to threaten local supermarkets into stocking his products. Castellano's rise in the Gambino family was nothing short of meteoric. As his influence grew, so did his wealth. He then expanded into the construction sector, where he and his son controlled Cigar Mix Concrete Corporation, monopolizing Staten Island's concrete supply. Through these ventures, he manipulated contracts ranging from $2 to $15 million with the Teamsters Union, pocketing a small 3% kickback. Despite the facade of legitimacy his businesses offered, at his core, Castellano remained a true gangster. With the passing of Gambino, Castellano was named the new head of the family, a decision that stunned many. Most had anticipated underboss Agnello Neil Della Croce would succeed Gambino. However, with Della Croce behind bars at the time, he was left with no choice but to accept Castellano's leadership. Now holding unchallenged control over the Gambino crime family, bodies began disappearing under his reign as boss of bosses. In 1978, Castellano allegedly ordered the hit on Nicholas Schibetta, a drug addict and alcoholic who was openly disrespectful to George DeSico's daughter. Just months later, it's also reported that Castellano ordered the murders of 2 Gambino capos, James Ippolito and his son, James Ippolito Jr. Recognizing the potential enemies he was creating, Paul prepared by positioning his family into an alliance with the Westies, an Irish-American gang from Hell's Kitchen, as well as the Cherry Hill Gambinos, a squad of Sicilian heroin suppliers in New Jersey. With all 3 gangs under his command, Castellano controlled a small army that he utilized to run New York City. After years of intimidations, extortions, robberies and homicides, the law finally caught up to Castellano on March 30th, 1984. Constantino Paul Castellano was formally indicted on federal racketeering, prostitution, drug trafficking and theft. However, he was released on a $2 million bail. The very next year he acquired 2 more indictments, both of which he made bail again, and retreated to his 17-bedroom mansion, where he became a recluse. His absence in the everyday affairs of the business created a swarm of discontents within the family. Most notably, it sparked a massive surge of spite in one John Gotti, a loyal underboss to Della Croce. Della Croce died of cancer on December 2, 1985. When Paul refused to attend his wake, Gotti took extreme umbrage at Castellano's disrespectful absence. Adding insult to injury, rumours were spreading that Paul planned to disband Gotti's crew now that Della Croce was out of the picture. Livid and looking for vengeance, Gotti began plotting his imminent push for power. On December 16, just 2 weeks after the death of Della Croce, Paul and Thomas Bilotti, a newly appointed underboss, pulled the car up to the entrance of Sparks' steakhouse. As they approached the front door, the aroma of seared beef and bourbon permeating. A hit team, consisting of Salvatore Scala, Edward Lino and John Carniglia, raced up to the car and opened fire as the two exited the vehicle. It's said that Carniglia delivered the killing shot, walking directly to Paul's fallen body and shooting him in the head. To make sure the job was done, Gotti ordered his driver to roll past the scene to see Castellano's lifeless body. Satisfied, he fled the scene and became the new Gambino crime family boss. Paul Castellano was buried in the Moravian cemetery in the New Drop area of Staten Island. However, he was refused a Catholic funeral by the Archdiocese due to his notorious life of crime. The underworld is a dark, sinister realm, intimately interweaving with society and every major metropolis in the country. Amidst these thieves, gangsters and murders, you rarely find a member of the crime syndicate known for restraint and conciliation over violence. Enter Angelo Bruno, aka the Gentle Don. Starting in Sicily as Angelo Annaloro, young Bruno made his way across the pond to South Philadelphia with his brother Vito. Learning the entrepreneurial spirit early in life, from his dad who started a small grocery store at 4341 North 6th Street, Bruno abandoned traditional education and dropped out of high school to open his own small store at the intersection of 8th and Annin Street. However, fate seemed to have other plans in store for him. His close ties with the crime family through his roommate, cousin of gangster John Simone, created a connection with the crime family boss, Carlo Gambino. It was around this time when he decided to drop his paternal name, Annaloro, and supplant it with Bruno. As a new member of the Philadelphia Mafia, Bruno was supplied with a sponsor to show him the ropes. His new mentor and confidant was Michael Maggio, the founder of A. Maggio Cheese Corp and convicted murderer with countrywide recognition. Utilizing the experience and talent in front of him, along with the business acumen he had already developed at a young age, Bruno elevated through the family ranks with ease and celerity. He opened and purchased several local businesses, including an extermination company and an aluminum products business in Florida, as well as acquiring a decent share in the Plaza Hotel in Havana, Cuba. During his climb to the top, he started a family of his own, marrying Assunta Maranca in 1931. They conceived 2 children, Michael and Jean. Wanting to maintain some semblance of a family man, Bruno managed to stay under the radar with violent felony charges. He was popped a few times early in his criminal career, but only minor violations like firearms, illicit alcohol stills, and illegal gambling. This finesseful approach to the criminal empire allowed Bruno to operate without the unwanted attention of the police and FBI. His rise to the top was furtive and subtle, but eventually, in 1959, Angelo Bruno was made boss of the Philadelphia crime family. The transition into his new lead role wasn't smooth, though. Entangled in his ascent was Antonio Mr. Miggs Polina, the current family boss. Mr. Biggs was planning an assassination for Bruno without the consent of the Commission, the organization dedicated to keeping peace between and within crime families around the United States. When this betrayal was discovered, the Commission quickly intervened and deposed him. Although an execution was well within his right, Bruno not only allowed Polina to keep breathing, but also permitted him to continue operating in certain territories, showing true testament to his moniker, the Gentle Don. This mentality and approach to his criminal undertakings provided over 20 years of relatively peaceful proliferation, avoiding almost any critical media or police attention. The 2 viruses that persistently violated other crime families. He even exiled one of his own guys, little Nicky Scarfo, for a manslaughter conviction he caught due to being extremely violent. Another aspect of his operational awareness was Bruno's refusal to get involved with drugs. He vehemently rejected any notions of his family transporting or selling narcotics. But with drug trafficking popping up in every city around the globe, He did allow certain other gangs to engage in such endeavors for a small fee. However, avarice always infiltrates the minds of men seeking power, and eventually, these passive tactics and unwillingness to enter the narcotics trafficking realm became his downfall. As Bruno commanded the Philadelphia family, he also built a contingent of soldiers and underbosses around himself. One of his key high-ranking members was Antonio Caponigro, his consigliere. Caponigro ascended through the Mafia beginning in the 1950s. He served under Capo Riccardo Biondi, an affluent mobster of a wealthy banana merchant. His connections continued to serve him, and in the 1970s was promoted to his position by Bruno. Not sharing the same sentiment for the family operations, Caponigro began machinating on his maneuvers to take the top spot. On March 21, 1980, Caponigro's scandalous seeds bore fruit. As Bruno approached his car, driver John Stanfar opened the rear door. When he set foot and entered the vehicle, shotgun blasts rang and echoed throughout his neighborhood streets. Bruno was killed instantly, while Stanfar was severely wounded. As news of the public execution propagated through the criminal underworld, Caponigro was immediately summoned by the commission. Upon his arrival, he was suddenly ambushed and asked about his involvement in Bruno's demise. Caponigro tried to pin the blame on Frank Thierry, but was instantly silenced. Stating that the hit on Bruno was never even considered, let alone sanctioned, the commission passed judgment on the spot. As quickly as his rise to the top began, he was cut down. On April 18th, less than a month after his betrayal of Bruno, Caponigro and his brother-in-law, Alfred Salerno, were found in the trunk of a car, naked and beaten to death. And who says there's no honor among thieves? The concrete jungle is a hard enough place for most people to make a name for themselves, and in the underbelly of New York City, becoming the boss of a crime family is an achievement that requires more than just sacrifice and discipline. In most circumstances, appropriation through assassination, accompanied by brazen proclamations, is incumbent to become the boss of bosses in the big city. Beckoning that call was Carmine the Cigar Galante, infamously known for the iconic stogie hanging from his mouth. Born Camillo Carmine Galante on February 21, 1910, in East Harlem, New York, his upbringing was anything but easy. By the prepubescent age of 10, Galante had already garnered serious street respect due to his criminal activities and established his first juvenile street gang in the Lower East Side. Foregoing formal education, Galante dropped academia from a classroom and hit the streets, becoming a Mafia associate during the Prohibition era and rising to a lead enforcer by the end of the 1920s. It was during this phase in his rise to power, on December 12, 1925, that he was arrested and received his first charge. Under advisement, he pleaded guilty to assault. Sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, Galante became forcibly accustomed to life behind bars early in his criminal career. Not long after his release, Galante was arrested again in August of 1930. He and an unknown accomplice robbed a payroll drop, shooting and killing police officer Walter Di Castilla. Somehow he was never indicted for his participation in that murder. However, as most criminals do, he provided more opportunities for authorities. Later that same year, NYPD officer Joseph Minahan happened to be patrolling the streets of Brooklyn when he noticed a contingent of criminals attempting to hijack a truck. Minahan immediately took action, jumping out from his police car and drawing his weapon. Galante and his crew responded with gunfire. During the exchange of bullets, Galante shot Officer Minahan as well as an innocent 6-year-old bystander. After the shootout stopped, they were rushed to the hospital. Both survived their wounds. Galante would be arrested and eventually pleaded guilty to armed robbery. As his second major offense, the judge sentenced him to 12.5 years in federal prison. After more than 8 long years behind bars, Galante was granted parole on May 1, 1939. During his time in confinement, he made plenty of powerful friends. Upon his release, he was quickly acquired by Vito Genovese, underboss of the Luciano crime family. Genovese recognized the nature and loyalty embedded within Galante and recruited him as one of his top hitmen. His ruthless reputation became ubiquitous in the underworld. Though never indicted, it's believed that he was personally involved in at least 80 murders in New York City and was known to have a cold, dead-eyed stare. As the years passed and the bodies piled up, Galante became a staple in the family and always stayed close to power. In 1953, a new venture for the progressing contract killer took hold when boss Joseph Bonanno sent Galante to Montreal. There he set up a shop to gain control of all gambling and heroin trafficking in the region. He was said to be importing massive amounts of heroin into the ports of Montreal and then shipping them down in the US. But his strong-arm extortion in the gambling arena eventually led to an arrest and deportation back to America in April of 1956. With the fresh taste of money and power from the business side of the crime family, Galante returned to the streets of New York City with a renewed vigor, enlisting the services of hungry young men from his home in Castellammare del Golfo Trapani into his crew called the Zips. These syndicate soldiers became his instruments of control, operating as assassins and traffickers for Galante's new empire. But the intricacies of the drug game were profoundly different than the brute force murder methods. In 1958, Galante was forced into hiding after being indicted on drug conspiracy charges. It would take several years before justice was served, but on July 10, 1962, Galante was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Less than 12 years later, after his third stint in federal prison, Carmine Galante was released yet again. Upon his freedom, it's said that he immediately ordered the bombing of the gravesite where lifelong rival Frank Costello was buried. Feeling owed, Galante took to the streets, claiming unofficial rights to the title, Boss of Bosses, completely ignoring the Commission's ruling to make Philip Rusty Rastelli the lead man. And when Rastelli was sentenced to prison time in 1976, he acquired unilateral power over the family that even the Commission didn't challenge. Over the years of his reign, it's reported that Galante ordered the hits on 8 members of the Gambino family in an effort to seize control over the entire drug trafficking industry in the Big Apple. This grab for power infuriated several bosses, including Rastelli and Genovese crime family boss Frank Thierry. They colluded to kill the Cigar, but sought the approval of the Commission before taking action. The Commission instantly agreed, green-lighting the assassination of Carmine Galante. The plot for payback propagated through the family along with the perfect person. Knowing the need for assistance from within, Rastelli, commanding from his prison cell, ordered 2 men to approach Galante's Zips to aid in his assassination in exchange for a promotion in the family. They accepted without a second thought and set the date. On July 12, 1979, Carmine the Cigar Galante was eating lunch on the patio of Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant. As he ate and jested with his supposed comrades and bodyguards responsible for his well-being, 3 men out front were waiting in angst. As the waiter was taking his plate, Galante sparked the pungent and robust cigar attached to his lips. As he exhaled the puff of smoke into the air, the 3 masked men burst onto the patio. His 2 bodyguards leaped out of the way and the shots rang out. Galante, Turano and Coppola were killed instantly. The 3 shooters got away that day. However, almost a decade later in 1987, Anthony Indelicato was sentenced to 40 years in prison for his role in the restaurant murders, but never revealed the other 2 culprits. Though he went down for the murders, it's widely rumored to this day that he was just a fall guy for the real killers. In the heart of Chicago, one of the most gruesome attacks between crime families occurred on the Day of Love. The year is 1929, and the United States was almost a decade deep into its Prohibition era. While average citizens struggled to find a drop, the crime syndicates around the country were proliferating, with the profits from illegally smuggling and distributing spirits in speakeasies and to high-end clientele. Within the battlegrounds of the Chicago streets, one syndicate was determined to be the controlling faction in the Windy City. For months, 2 rival families had been vying for bootlegging territories, and with key members missing, it was the perfect time to strike. At 10:30 a.m. on Valentine's Day, 7 men from the North Side gang were abducted and transported to a garage at 2122 North Clark Street. 2 men dressed as police were seen escorting these 7 high-ranking associates into the building. Among the dead men walking were Albert Kachelek, brother-in-law and second-in-command to George Bugs Moran, leader of the North Side gang. Accompanying the priority target was Adam Heyer, the bookkeeper and business manager, Albert Weinshank, who operated a myriad of cleaning companies as well as 2 lead enforcers for the NSG, Frank and Peter Gusenberg. The final 2 slain in the massacre were Reinhard H. Schwimmer and John May, outside associates of the gang in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the Mortality 7 entered the dimly lit garage, they were led to a wall in the back where they were met by 2 more men dressed in suits, armed with Thompson submachine guns, aka Tommy guns. Set in a line in front of the concrete wall, they anxiously awaited the next move. Suddenly, the 4 men opened fire, unloading entire clips and drums into the helpless members of the North Side gang. Witnesses stated that the men were thorough with the gunfire, spraying from left to right, and even continuing to fire after the bodies had hit the floor. When the machine gun symphony ceased, it was sealed with a crescendo of 2 close-range 20-gauge shotgun blasts that all but obliterated the faces of John May and Albert Kachelek. When the police arrived on the scene, the blood-soaked and mangled bodies lay lifeless on the cold grey floor. Surprisingly though, Frank Gusenberg had managed to stay alive, even with 14 bullet holes riddled throughout his body. Upon discovering a live witness, detectives immediately began badgering him about what happened and who was responsible. Frank simply replied, "I won't talk, for God's sake, get me to a hospital." He was dead less than 3 hours later. With several witnesses coming forward after the murders, the investigators were able to piece together the puzzle of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. However, with Al Capone being in his Florida home during the incident, it was nearly impossible to pin it on him. As the probe continued, it was believed that the kidnapping-turned-homicide was a play meant to take out Bugs Moran himself, but he was away on business, thought to have been making a move on Capone's trade routes for booze and the dog track operating in the Chicago suburbs. The timing of the attack fit perfectly for the motive. Outraged and heartbroken, the city of Chicago erupted in an outcry for justice. Within the day of the massacre, a summons was delivered to Capone to appear in front of the grand jury, but he declined to show up due to health reasons. Fortunately, more witnesses started to emerge, one stating they saw a 1927 Cadillac leaving the garage just after hearing the shooting. Coincidentally, that same Cadillac was found on February 22nd in a parking garage off Wood Street, smouldering in ash and smoke as the blaze had already receded. With another hot lead gone, and talks of police assisting with the massacre, it was beginning to look like the case was going cold. But luck does strike twice for some. That same day of the homicides, a truck driver clipped a police car just outside of the garage. When he stopped to address the accident, the officer waved him on his way. Realizing his suspicions were correct after hearing about the massacre, he came forward to testify that the man disguised as an officer was missing a tooth. Not much later, another man passing by saw the wreck and corroborated the description. Police finally had a concrete piece of the puzzle. Known to dress up as police when committing crimes, detectives believed they were dealing with Fred Burke and his accomplice, James Ray, known members of the gang Egan's Rats. Burke was already on the run from a warrant in Ohio for robbery and murder and disappeared off the radar. However, this breakthrough led the investigators to evidence showing possible suspects ranging from family hitmen John Scalise and Albert Anselmi to Capone's own bodyguards, Jack McGurn and Frank Rio, which the police force made publicly known. Later that May, Capone ordered John Scalise and his associate Hoptoad Junta executed on grounds that they were planning to kill Capone. As the year came to an end, it was a drunk driving hit-and-run turned homicide that would lead to the first arrest. On December 14th, a man known as Frederick Dane left a bar and backed into a parked vehicle. He brazenly took off, but was followed by patrolman Charles Skelly. After a few miles of cat and mouse, Skelly finally forced Dane off the road and jumped onto the hood of his car. Dane fired 3 shots to his body, clipped him off the hood, and Skelly died later that night. Tracing back the vehicle that was later found in a ditch, they quickly identified Frederick Dane as Fred Burke. Michigan police stormed his home, unveiling $320,000 worth of bonds that were recently stolen from a Wisconsin bank, as well as a myriad of guns and ammo, including 2 Thompson submachine guns, but no Burke. With the advent of ballistic forensic technology, Chicago police were able to match the guns to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and another unsolved homicide of New York gangster Frankie Yale. With the evidence stacked, a nationwide manhunt was in full effect. Police and citizens across the country searched diligently. And though it took slightly over a year, Fred Burke was finally captured on a farm in Missouri. Because of the heinous crime and overwhelming evidence against his murder of patrolman Skelly, Burke was tried in Michigan and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 1940. In a raid by the FBI, a man named Byron Bolton was arrested. He would later tell authorities that the plot to murder Bugs Moran was conceived in October or November of 1928, and that he and Jimmy Moran were supposed to alert the killers at the Circus Cafe when Bugs Moran arrived. However, he mistook Moran's men to be Bugs himself and was threatened by Capone for his screw-up in the ambush. Although Bolton's claims made headlines, the FBI wanted no part in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and no charges were ever filed. Even though all evidence points to Fred Burke as one of the culprits, no convictions were ever made in the Valentine Massacre case, maintaining it as one of the worst unsolved murders of the century. The Roaring Twenties spawned a plethora of social and economic changes, especially with the implementation of prohibition, which started almost immediately into the new decade on January 17th. While lawmakers hoped to see positive changes throughout the United States with the ban on spirits, the underworld saw its opportunity to rise up and claim control of the country. The illegal production, distribution and sale of alcohol became a burgeoning business in the shadows of the streets. This open market on crime gave birth to many infamous mobsters, including the legendary Benjamin Bugsy Seigel, known as the leading force for the construction of the Las Vegas Strip. Entering the world on February 28, 1906, Seigel was one of 5 children being raised in the Williamsburg region of Brooklyn. His poor mother and father emigrated from Austria, both working mundane jobs for meager wages to barely support the family of 7. Refusing to follow his parents' path, Bugsy began early in his criminal career, dropping out before even making high school to join the Lafayette Street Gang on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. His journey through the underworld was a slow ascent initially, mostly sticking with petty theft. But all of that changed when he met Mo Sedway. As a team, they created their first protection racket, hustling local shops for $1 to prevent their pushcarts from perilous destruction by fire. This leap into intimidation and extortion was the catalyst and driving force that propelled Bugsy Seigel from a mediocre mobster to a feared and respected boss. His criminal record quickly grew, bolstering a litany of charges from armed robbery to murder. His reckless disregard for the law caught the attention of Meyer Lansky, a man from the Jewish part of Brooklyn who saw a need for his talents. Introducing a new, brilliant approach in the underworld industries, he formed a small group of brothers from his neighborhood to emulate the Italian and Irish mobs. His first member of this newly found gang was none other than Benjamin Bugsy Seigel. Together, these two took swift command of several bootlegging territories throughout the East Coast cities. It wasn't long after that the two formed the Bugs and Meyer Mob, a contract killer club that handled hits for various gangs in New York and New Jersey. They established a reputation early by ambushing liquor cargoes and eliminating a few key figures from several rival gangs. Not one for moderation, Bugsy was also involved in drug trafficking from a young age. His narcotic of choice was heroin as a kid, introducing him to a network of smugglers that transformed an addiction into a lucrative lifestyle that he openly flaunted. From flashy suits and shoes to premium apartments in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, Seigel made sure to enjoy the treasures of his plunders. His lavish life and heinous wrongdoings only proliferated from there. It wasn't much later when his partner Lansky, along with Lucky Luciano, created the National Crime Syndicate to maintain integrity among the crime families in the country. Following this formation, the Commission and Murder Inc. were also established to help maintain the hierarchy of the system. The bomb planted in Seigel's fortified apartment in the Waldorf Astoria almost finished the job, but the reinforced walls saved both of their lives. The resulting reprisal ended with 2 of the 3 Fabrizio brothers being hunted down and brutally murdered by Bugsy. The provident Punisher didn't stop there. After careful consideration, the East Coast mob decided it was best to send Seigel out west to California. But this wasn't for a respite. Included in his relocation package was the task to form a gambling racket alongside Jack Dragner, the LA crime family boss. Using Dragner's intimate knowledge of the area, Bugsy gained control of the numbers racket and then funneled the revenue from that into forming a drug route from Mexico. By 1942, it's said that his Los Angeles syndicate was responsible for bringing in over $500,000 each month. Seeking even higher ambitions, Bugsy Seigel found inspiration to reinvent himself as a legitimate businessman, and in 1946 he partnered with the William R. Wilkerson's Flamingo Hotel. As his underbosses continued to establish dominance in the LA gambling circuit, Seigel secretly planned on pioneering a luxury casino resort to attract big-time gamblers and high rollers. Under the threat of death, all rights to the Flamingo were signed over to Bugsy, bringing the entire operation completely under syndicate control. But the plans for unprecedented power of the gambling industry in Vegas eventually took an unexpected turn. With construction setbacks and permit issues, the cost of developing the resort started to stack much higher than anticipated. After 2 years of setbacks and millions more invested, the Flamingo Resort finally opened its doors on December 26, 1946. But a rare winter storm coupled with a precipitous launch, riddled with construction errors and subpar accommodations, led to a dismal beginning that continued into late January with a net loss of $275,000. The syndicate immediately shut down the Flamingo, but Bugsy was determined to make it a success. Several months later, after hiring a PR manager and finishing construction, the Flamingo reopened and started to see a profit. But the damage was already done. Seigel's reach into the Mafia pockets was exceeded when they discovered he had been secretly running an operation in LA that he kept off the books, using the money to finance the opulent design of the Flamingo. He brazenly responded to the syndicate that he would repay the loan when he was ready. With the fruits of his labor and luxurious spending finally coming to bear, the decision was made to terminate Bugsy Seigel. Less than 2 months after the reopening of the Flamingo Casino and Resort, Seigel nonchalantly relaxed in his girlfriend's home in Beverly Hills. While he sat on the sofa reading the Los Angeles Times, a figure in the shadows outside her mansion began his preparations. Armed with a .30 caliber military carbine machine gun, he fired 9 full jacket rounds into the living room. 4 of his shots hit his target, 2 penetrating Siegel's head and ejecting his eye to the other side of the room. Benjamin Bugsy Seigel was killed instantly, and his assassin vanished into the night. In his memory, a plaque was constructed and placed on the Flamingo Resort in Las Vegas between the pool and wedding chapel.